new Jewish sect appeared on the scene, inspired by the recent execution of a rabbi from Galilee. The Jesus movement threatened everything Paul held most dear.
Basically, I'm walking up the Via Dolorosa, which is the way they say that Jesus walked to his crucifixion, carrying his cross. It's an extraordinary feeling to be part of a group like this. You're almost caught up in it, you can't help it.
Today, Christianity is the world's largest religion. It's easy to forget that 2,000 years ago it was just a minor sect of Judaism. The Jesus movement could easily have withered and died with the death of its leader. But soon after the crucifixion, Jesus' followers became convinced that God had raised him from the dead, that he was the Jewish Messiah, and that claim sparked a violent response from Paul and his fellow Pharisees.
What was the trouble? What was going on with this sect that would have made Paul so angry?
So Paul is, at that stage, showing his zeal for the law, that these misguided Christians believed that Jesus was the Messiah. But if Jesus was the Messiah, then the law had no longer had any place. And the law was what made Paul's life at that stage as a Pharisee. And I think that's why he persecuted Christians. They wanted it to have it both ways, to be Christians and practicing Jews. Paul said, no, it's either or.
Observance of the law was everything to Paul. How dare these Jewish heretics claim that Jesus was the long-awaited Messiah? If so, then a new age had begun, and the law was no longer important. In Paul's eyes, they should be wiped from the face of the earth. For you have heard of my previous way of life in Judaism, how intensely I persecuted the Church of God and tried to destroy it. I was extremely zealous for the traditions of my fathers. According to the book of Acts, Paul focused his anger on one of the leading lights of the Jesus movement, a young man called Stephen, who had been successfully convincing Jews like Paul to convert. Stephen was dragged outside the city gates and viciously stoned to death. We're told Paul stood watching, apparently minding the coats of the executioners.
In those cases where you hear of people being stoned in Jewish antiquity, I think generally it's a mob action.
And why stoning?
Stoning is a kind of popular thing to do. Anybody can do it. You don't need special equipment.
You mean it's all around you, you just pick it up?
You just pick them up and do that. It's the type of thing mobs can do.
It must have been a pretty ugly thing then, to be stoned by mob rule.
I'm sure that being stoned was a very ugly thing. It doesn't leave all that much of the body when so many stones have been thrown.
So being a Pharisee, that would be a sort of normal reaction to that?
It's certainly to oppose people who are preaching the abrogation of Jewish law would be normal. How far you go with that, does it take you to stoning, is another issue.
Paul seemed consumed with hatred for the Jesus movement. Yet there was something about this man I just didn't understand.
Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast. It is not proud, it is not rude. It is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil. It seems strange to me that someone who can stand by, witness, and even condone such an atrocity of stoning another human being to death is also capable of writing some of the most beautiful words ever written, and are used in wedding ceremonies around the world, even to this very day.
What transformed this zealous persecutor of the Jesus movement into its greatest ambassador? According to the Bible, the answer lies on the road to Damascus, in one of the most fantastic and dramatic stories ever told. Paul is on his way to root out more followers of Jesus when suddenly his whole world is turned around.
according to Acts, on his way to Damascus, he had a conversion experience. He saw a blinding light that literally blinded him physically. He heard the voice of Jesus saying, Saul, using his Jewish name, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And he was given his commission to evangelize the Gentiles. It was a changing moment in Paul's life, and we often refer to it now as the blinding light experience of conversion. But I would like to find out what really happened.
In the Bible, deserts lend themselves to life-changing moments. Both Jesus and Moses had spent time in the wilderness. To help me make sense of Paul's conversion, I met psychologist Shmuel Elric.
I'm searching for Paul the character. I can't ignore that central conversion experience. How do I make that change?
I would suggest that you look very carefully and deeply into his past. You look into what happened before, into his persecution, into his aggression, into his need to kill Christians, which I think speaks of some kind of an inner turmoil. What you see, especially in people who are struggling with their identity, and if the struggle is very deep, you see that they can sometimes turn around, almost, if you will, 180 degrees, and from what you would consider to be one identity, suddenly become the opposite of it.
Right.
I think this is what happened with St. Paul. He persecuted the Christians before, and then suddenly he shifted completely and became their spokesman and their guardian in a way, their promoter and their leader, really.
Whatever really happened on the road to Damascus, it's clear that from that moment on, Paul's beliefs changed forever. He was now convinced he had met Jesus face to face, that God had brought him back from the dead, and that therefore he must be the Messiah, and that the end of days was coming very, very soon. Paul is said to have returned to Jerusalem to try and convince the leadership of the Jesus movement that whatever his crimes against them in the past, he was now on their side. That God had chosen him to be an apostle, on a par with the disciples who had actually known Jesus. It must have been a difficult sell. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the leadership suggested that their former persecutor would be of most use to them away from Jerusalem, back in his home city of Tarsus, in modern-day Turkey.
Tarsus.
Yes, here we are.
Where Paul was born.
Yes.
How had Paul's childhood home influenced his life? My guide Munir grew up in Tarsus and agreed to show me around.
Are there many sites that one can go to that will see where Paul went in the city? Is he very famous here?
Very famous. We have St. Paul's Well, St. Paul's House, St. Paul's Church, many St. Paul cafes.
And is he popular character? Do people like him?
They love him. It's their famous son.
Tarsus is a Muslim city and has been for centuries, so I was intrigued by how today's population regarded Paul. After Friday prayers, Munir took me to the Grand Mosque to meet some of the locals.
Could you ask our friend what he might know about St. Paul?
Şimdi St. Paul, aziz, muhterem St. Paul büyüğümüz.
We know him as a Christian saint who had this incredible energy. He walked for miles. He probably had a donkey, and he went from one village to another and explained all about Jesus, what Jesus was saying.
How much has Tarsus changed since you were a child?
The essence of Tarsus is the same. In other words, it's retained its values. This about, I think the most important value Tarsus has is tolerance for each other. This area is liberal. Tarsus is liberal. Probably this is the influence of St. Paul.
Yeah. Do you think
It has to be? What else?
Because of St. Paul?
Yes, what else?
It was fascinating that here in Muslim Tarsus, Paul was remembered as a liberal influence. Let us stop passing judgment on one another. Make up your mind not to put any stumbling block or obstacle in your brother's way. Munir had given me a great introduction to the modern city, but I was keen to find out what Tarsus would have been like in Paul's day.
Thank you very much. Which way do I go?
You go this way.
All right.
I go.
How had it shaped him as a boy? And what had he learned here that would help him on his new mission to win converts to Jesus? At one of the city's few remaining Roman sites, I met archaeologist Sarah Duragonal.
This is the only known archaeological remain we have from the time period Paulus has lived here in this city.
This is a Roman road?
This is a Roman road. It is dated to the 1st century BC or AD. We are not yet sure, but there is a very similar example for this road in Pompeii, which is dated to the 1st century BC.
Would Paul have actually walked along this road, do you think?
We think so. We can imagine that he walked through because it's just the time period he has lived here. So he must have walked here.
Was this a busy, busy city?
Yes, it was a very important city because it was a philosophical city. Many philosophers passed by from this city.
Did they?
And we know that there was a school for philosophy in this town. So alone this shows that it was an important city.
And is that possibly why Paul would have said, I'm a citizen of no ordinary city?
Yes, that can be a good explanation for this sentence.
So he was very proud of this
yes.
city. And he's also very proud of his dual, if you like, dual citizenship and nationality. He says, I'm a Jew and I'm a Roman.
Yes, both characters. And he knows perfect Greek. He is educated in that language. He has the Roman citizenship and he's a Jew.
Paul's early life had been very different from that of Jesus and the disciples. Paul had grown up in a city, was highly educated and well versed in Greek philosophy. But in one respect he was similar. We're told he had a craft and earned his living as a tent maker. The countryside around Tarsus was famous for its flax, the plant used to make linen. Perhaps Paul wove his tents. My guide Ali took me to a traditional weaver's shop for a lesson with the irrepressible Hassan, who even though he's now in his 70s, clearly still loves his work.
I can have a go? Oh, well, I've done certain things in my life. This is a first. Oh my goodness me. What am I doing?
Push it back.
Şu belki ayaklasın.
Right feet. Left feet.
I'm working my feet.
Paul was certainly proud of the fact he worked for a living and didn't rely on anyone for handouts.
Shuffle, left foot.
We did not eat anyone's food without paying for it. On the contrary, we worked day and night, laboring and toiling so that we would not be a burden to any of you.
We were doing well. We were doing well. That's, I'm afraid that's all that's left of the shot. I don't think I'm going to pass